Supposedly to stop Private Adams from hurling a stone at him, MP Carson W. Bosman drew his gun and fired.
Alright y'all, welcome back to Combat Arms channel. Okay, so today we're checking out a recommendation that I got in the How to Behave in a British Pub video. Now, I guess since that was set in the 1940s, it reminded y'all about something called the Battle of Bamber Bridge, which is not something that I had heard about previously, and probably for a few good reasons, judging by what you guys were telling me. So I managed to find a video about it. This is from the YouTube channel, The Front. So I'm excited to check it out. They do some really good historical stuff. So I got my Yorkshire Gold here, and I'm excited to check out this video. So let's do it.
We've done videos on friendly fire in World War II, Imperial Japan's inter-service hostilities, and Allied forces such as the Americans and Soviets going toe-to-toe. But did you know that two American units fought and shot each other over in northwest England in June 1943?
England of all places too.
This is the story of the so-called Battle of Bamber Bridge, a skirmish fueled by beer and no small amount of racism.
Yep. Again, that's what you guys were telling me. So the other videos that they mentioned actually look pretty interesting, so we might have to check those out as well. Also, if you guys want to check out the mug, I have a link in the video description for some merch.
Until US President Harry S. Truman issued Executive Order 9981 in July 1948, the branches of the United States Armed Forces suffered from varying degrees of racial segregation. The first clause of the order read as follows: "It is hereby declared that there shall be equality of treatment and opportunity for all persons in the armed services without regard to race, color, religion, or national origin."
So nowadays we have something called equal opportunity in the military, which, I mean, I guess that's a pretty common phrase anywhere you go. But that's a really big thing in the military, which is awesome. If you're racist in the military, it's going to show and it's going to come up. Now, I have experienced, or I've been around some racism in the military, that's for sure. But it was not in the infantry of all places, which, I mean, it's kind of weird. I think with the infantry, you get people from all different backgrounds, because generally it's just people who kind of just want to get, you know, their foot in the door in life because they don't really have the opportunity to do that otherwise. So they join the military, and the infantry is just a cool option for a lot of people. At least that was kind of what happened with me. But it's also, you know, a really crappy experience altogether, and you sort of have this shared trauma and you bond over it. There's really no time for racism in a combat zone because you rely very, very, very heavily on each other. So I haven't really seen it in the infantry. I'm sure it is there every now and again, but yeah, it's definitely something that the military tries to stomp out as soon as possible.
Of course, the order didn't erase racism in the military, and it was put into effect some 5 years after the Battle of Bamber Bridge. Throughout World War II, some 2 million American servicemen passed through or were stationed in the UK for a variety of purposes, and they weren't always on the job. They often toured the UK and interacted with its denizens. Many American servicemen married English women and brought them back to America when the war was over.
Hell yeah.
More often than not, African Americans were well received by the British populace, at least at the start. When more racist white Americans poured into the UK, they imposed their aholery upon the British, refusing, for example, to eat at a restaurant that served black people. According to Roy Otterly's article, Dixie Invades Britain, which was published in 1942, American observers who were in the UK in 1942 when the first contingents arrived from America saw amicable and smooth relations develop between the Negro troops and their British hosts. So much so that certain white American soldiers became openly resentful, and they lost no time in attempting to discipline the British people.
What?
According to an article...
Now, I am by no means blaming the British people because that's not where the blame should be. But I'm really surprised that they were able to tolerate that whatsoever. I mean, I imagine this fight is going to break out because people are going to recognize that they're not going to tolerate that kind of nonsense. I'm surprised it didn't give more pushback to the Americans and that some Brits actually adopted it. It's really kind of bad to say that they were, you know, adopting that really crappy American behavior. But yeah, I mean, it's interesting And this is not something that I've been exposed to previously. You know, a lot of historics when it comes to World War II doesn't really focus so much on this kind of stuff. So it is kind of interesting to see how cultures kind of collide when it comes to things like this. Because, yeah, I imagine, you know, it's not really something that the Brits were really accustomed to. It's not something that they experienced or practiced. But now that you have the Americans coming over and bringing some of that, yeah, I'm surprised it didn't give more pushback to the Americans.
The resentment was due, at least in part, to the frustration of white American soldiers who saw how open British women were to relationships with black Americans and simply couldn't handle it without chucking a massive tantrum.
God forbid.
In the words of author Graham Smith, many young girls found the blacks fascinating, appreciating their attentiveness and good manners. The United States Army Air Forces, or USAAF, the precursor to the US Air Force, operated out of more than 200 airfields in the UK,
Damn,
each
200?
base housing an average of 2,500 men. Among the American units which flew out of the UK was the 8th Army Air Force, and one of the 8 supporting units was the 1,511th Quartermaster Truck Regiment.
Oh my God, 1,511th. That's a mouthful. I mean, I know there's a lot of units in World War II, but what is this? Sometimes the units, like, numbers don't make a whole lot of sense to me. Like, was there really a 1,510th Quartermaster Truck Regiment?
A racially segregated unit composed of African American soldiers. These men were housed at Air Force Station 569, or more colloquially, Adam Hall, in the village of Bamber Bridge in Lancashire, England.
Okay.
Their job was to deliver, via trucks, war material to other air bases in the area. When they were off duty, some of the men enjoyed a pint or two at a watering hole called Ye Old Hob Inn, where they were more than amicable with the local English.
Hell yeah.
When the white Americans started cracking down on this, demanding the establishment of a colour bar in the village's 3 pubs put up signs reading "Black Troops Only."
Hell yeah.
Racism, it seemed, would not be tolerated in Bamber Bridge.
Good stuff.
Unfortunately, the 234th US Military Police Company, which operated on the north side of the village,
Fucking MPs, man, that's all I gotta say,
were especially sore about the attentive, well-mannered African American men winning the hearts of Bamber Bridge's women.
They're jelly,
The
man.
MPs had standing orders to arrest American soldiers who were out without a pass, who weren't dressed properly, or who were acting disorderly. On the 24th of June 1943, just days after the race riot back in Detroit, Michigan, they tried to use their power to give the black soldiers of the 1,511th a hard time. The consequences were disastrous.
Oh, snap.
While the specifics might vary between sources, the core of the story remains the same.
All right, let's hear it.
Possibly because an African American soldier tried to purchase a beer after last orders had been called, MPs Roy A. Windsor and Ralph F. Ridgway entered Ye Old.
So just barring the research that was probably done just for this video, I mean, having the full names of the MPs probably goes to show with some of the credibility of the story itself. But I'm definitely going to have to try and read up on this separately. So if you guys have some articles or maybe even books that mention this, then I would like to check that out. So recommend them down below.
Hob Inn on the night of the 24th and tried to cite one private Eugene Nunn for being without a pass and for wearing the wrong uniform. An argument broke out, and the locals, as well as British servicewomen of the Auxiliary Territorial Service, sided with Nunn and the 1,511th.
Nice.
An unnamed white British soldier also chimed in, saying, "Why do you want to arrest them? They're not doing anything or bothering anybody." The heat increased, and one private, Lynn M. Adams of the 1,511th, brandished a bottle. In retaliation,
snap.
Windsor drew his gun. It might have gone down then and there had not a black sergeant by the name of William Byrd managed to defuse the situation.
Okay.
The MPs got into their jeep and were on their way out, but Private Adams was mad and probably a little drunk and decided it would be a good idea to throw his bottle at the jeep.
It's going down now, I
were
guess.
outnumbered and chose not to retaliate at that moment. Instead, they gathered some reinforcements and ambushed the men of the 1,511th as they were walking back to Adam Hall later that night.
Come on now. There's definitely multiple opportunities to defuse this, and you can see that, you know, some sergeants were stepping in to try and defuse it. But when you have the separation of them actually leaving, and then, you know, getting reinforcements, and then I guess they're saying ambushing them. I'm not exactly sure what that means in the context, but that seems very, very premeditated to the point where it was kind of probably like a personal sort of grudge or them just getting butthurt about something specifically.
A fight ensued on the road, possibly with the MPs wielding billy clubs. The 1511th fought back with bottles and loose cobblestones.
Golly.
Supposedly to stop Private Adams from hurling a stone at him, MP Carson W. Bosman drew his gun and fired. The bullet struck the private in the neck, but he wasn't killed.
You could have at least done like a warning shot. Holy shit. I mean, it looks like he was probably trying to shoot him. I know it might have been in some sort of self-defense if he was throwing a stone, but holy cow, dude, you're going to shoot him in the neck?
The fight soon subsided, and the men of the 1511th made it back to Adam Hall mostly in one piece.
Damn, dude.
At some point during the chaos, a rumor spread throughout the village. A black soldier had been shot in the back, and the MPs were out on a manhunt. There seems to be a little confusion about what happened next, but the resounding narrative is that a pissed off crowd of some 200 black men rallied at Adam Hall, standing against their white senior officers and calling for war. It's possible they would have stormed the village en masse, but the 1511th's only black officer, Lieutenant Edwin D. Jones, was able to calm them down
Good stuff,
for
LT.
the time being. It wasn't long after that, however, that about a dozen MPs drove into Adam Hall in several jeeps and an improvised armored car fitted with a machine gun. This prompted the 1000...
Yeah, I know that they were like calling for war, but this is definitely escalating to the point where it's like actually looking like a war. They got like a improvised armored car with a machine gun. Like, what are you going to do? Start firing on your own dudes? It seems a little bit unreasonable. Sheesh.
511 to seize about 2/3 of the firearms stored at Adams Hall and either take up defensive positions or drive or run out into the night to meet the MPs head on. The locals were instructed to stay inside, and over the next 3 to 4 hours, a firefight raged throughout the Bamber Bridge area.
No kidding.
A private of the 1511th, one William Crossland, took a bullet and died, while 4 or 5 other soldiers and 2 MPs were injured. It could have been much, much worse, all things considered.
No kidding, they had a machine gun.
Following this mess, 2 trials were conducted. In the first, 4 of the African American men involved in the fight in which Private Adams was shot were found guilty of various offenses, dishonorably discharged, and sentenced to hard labor.
Damn.
In the second trial, 28 of the 35 defenders were convicted of offenses such as ignoring orders, failing to disperse, rioting, mutiny, seizing arms, and firing on officers and MPs. They were sentenced to as many as 15 years, but further reviews saw a reduction in these sentences and the release of some of the men. 15 of them returned to duty in June 1944, just in time for the Normandy landings.
Oh my gosh.
All in all, the longest period served by any of the men was just 13 months. Again, things could have been much worse. The commander of the 8th Army Air Force, General Ira C. Eaker, believed much of the blame fell on the MPs, whose blatant racism inspired the entire affair. The white officers...
I mean, if it was obvious, I feel like they could have done a better job with the investigation, especially when, you know, the actual, like, the commander is saying this sort of stuff. Yeah, I don't know. I wonder how the sort of investigations went back in the day. I'm sure, of course, they might have still had some bias, just judging by the actual cultural climate, but... even still, I mean, when it comes to an investigating officer, it's really their duty to be as unbiased as possible. And, you know, not being racist is definitely going to be a part of that. So, yeah, I wonder how the process actually went, but it seemed like it wasn't too in favor of the, I guess, the defenders.
Of the 1511th were also largely to blame, as they did a terrible job of trying to pacify the rioting men at Adam Hall and also refused to tend to the wounded among them. At least one of them was reportedly drunk. Following the incident, the 1511th and other trucking units' ranks were purged of racist officers, and black officers were integrated into the MP units. Things got slightly better after that. That's kind of
smart.
We're interested to know what you think though. Had you heard of the Battle of Bamber Bridge before today? Why do you think it happened? Lastly, can you think of any similar battles which took place during the war?
Yeah, of course. If you guys have anything similar to recommend, I'd like to check that out as well. But yeah, definitely an interesting story. And again, not one that I had heard previously until you guys recommended it. So yeah, it definitely seemed like there's a lot of ambiguity with certain details of it. But I think the way that they solved it was definitely, you know, some good progress as far as putting some of the black officers in with the MPs and kind of purging some of the leadership. So it seems like the response was appropriate eventually, but of course, you can see it went out of hand very, very quickly. Should not have gotten to the point where they were getting like what? It's like up armored. Well, I guess they said up armored, but it was basically some, you know, makeshift armored vehicle with a machine gun. I doubt at the time the MPs really had many like non-lethal capabilities, but even still, bringing a machine gun into it is definitely going to agitate the situation. So I think nowadays it definitely would not get that far. I think it's a lot more understood. If there are certain orders out there, people generally understand the orders. And even if, you know, there's someone just being a little bit disorderly, it's kind of like a one-off situation. You're not going to escalate it further and further to the point where you're shooting someone and then calling out all these Jeeps and whatnot. So definitely got out of hand. I don't think this is something that would happen in today's society. And again, just having that sort of leadership that's very like, you know, racist or biased or what have you, is not going to fly in the military today. So I'm glad to see that things have definitely changed, because this is just a very odd situation, not something that I could imagine today. But yeah, let me know what you guys think. If you guys have experienced anything like this, I mean, probably, hopefully, not on the same level as this. But if you experience anything like this where it got, you know, sort of out of control and it shouldn't have, let me know how that was down in the comment section or how it went down. And again, if you have any sorts of books or any other similar stories, please recommend them down below, because I'd like to check it out. But thank you for just supporting the channel. Thank you for these awesome recommendations and allowing me to share this knowledge with everybody else, because I'm sure there's a lot of Americans that might be watching this that have not heard about this specific incident. And yeah, again, it's an interesting one. So thank you guys again. Hopefully you guys enjoyed it. I'll see you on the next one.